This is just a disclaimer saying that these chat sessions are basically for my entertainment, but as I'm studying Torah, I do believe that the AI has the ability to do the research. Now, how I interpret that information and how I present that information is pretty much what this is about. So if I give it a question leading it in a different direction, it's going to take me down on what I call a rabbit hole. And then sometimes it even gets it right, and sometimes it even inspirational and life-changing. So it's up to the listener to decide how they want to apply this information. But let's begin our chat session. Well, now that we've got all the disclaimers out of the way, and we're ready to discuss about our first episode, let's introduce to you ChatGTP4, and let's begin with the questions. According to the Torah, especially in the book of Leviticus, it says that there's a difference between a meeting with Adonai and being called by Hashem. Emphasis on the words meeting and called. This means that if they are not called by God and you still meet with God by using the tools that He gave mankind to speak with Him, this action can place God under their authority. And this action or meeting can put Hashem in a place where He doesn't want to be or has to respect their communication, not necessarily their wishes. And He has to listen to them, whether they're good or bad, kind of like a Balaam sense. Now, instead, when Hashem is calling, like He did with Moses, instead of meeting, that calling was a little bit different because it was God saying to the person, I have a purpose for you, and I have a plan for you, and this is what I want you to do, to obey and listen to me. When Moses did this act, which is different than the meeting, it was a devotion of showing the love of the relationship of that covenant. Explain all of that to me as best as you can.
Question delves into the nuanced understanding of divine communication and authority as presented in the Torah, specifically within the context of Leviticus and the broader narrative involving Moses. In Jewish thought, the nature of interaction with humanity, and especially with the leaders and prophets of the Israelites, is both complex and deeply significant. Meeting versus being called. In the Torah, the distinction between meeting, often understood as a more generic or even initiated by the human, and being called by God, is pivotal. This distinction reflects different dynamics in the relationship between God and humans. 1. Meeting, gisha. This term might not be directly used in the context you're describing, but the concept of a human meeting God or having an encounter with God implies a situation where a human approaches God, uses the tools or methods prescribed, such as sacrifices in Leviticus, and places themselves under God's authority. It's a form of seeking divine guidance or favor, where the individual acknowledges God's supremacy and their own subservience or dedication to God's will. Number 2, being called, kriya, being called by God as Moses was, signifies a more direct and purposeful divine intervention. This is not about humans seeking God out, but about God choosing an individual for a specific mission or role. When God called Moses, it was a unilateral divine act expressing, I have chosen you for a purpose and I am directing you to fulfill it. This call establishes a covenantal relationship based on obedience, submission to God's will, and a mutual understanding of the mission at hand. The covenant and relationship with God. The relationship between Moses and God, as depicted in the Torah, is a profound illustration of this covenantal bond. It was not merely about obedience, but also about a deep, mutual understanding. Moses is chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, receive the law, and guide the people according to God's commands. This calling establishes a relationship characterized by communication. God speaks directly to Moses, instructing him and guiding the Israelites. Mission. Moses is given a clear purpose and task, which he accepts, signifying his agreement to the covenant. Obedience and trust. Moses obeys God's commands, even when they are challenging, demonstrating his trust in God's plan. Love and respect. The relationship is not merely transactional, but is imbued with love and respect. Moses loves God and respects his wisdom and authority, while God shows love and patience towards Moses and the Israelites. In essence, the difference between meeting and being called by God in the Torah encapsulates different aspects of the human-divine relationship. While both involve recognizing God's authority and seeking to fulfill his will, being called by God for a specific purpose underscores a deeper, more personal relationship and mission, exemplified by Moses' experience. This distinction highlights the varied ways in which individuals can relate to and interact with the divine, each with its own implications for understanding one's place in the world and responsibility to a higher calling.
Staying on topic, in the commentary at the beginning of the book of Leviticus, it talks about a prophet named Bilam who used the meeting concept with God in a negative way. And then God had to succumb to him or listen to him because he used the tools that probably were the same tools that Moses would have used. By doing this, he used it to usurp the authority of Adonai, kind of having God obey his own word. So Bilam could have been as great as Moses, but he chose not to. He was more like an evil person, and he used that knowledge of how to destroy his own people, having God do it for him. Thoughts on this?
Reference touches on the intriguing and complex figure of Bilam in Hebrew, whose story is found in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, not Leviticus. Balaam is a non-Israelite prophet who is sought by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Israelites as they approach Moabite territory during their desert wanderings. Despite his pagan status, Balaam is portrayed as having a genuine ability to communicate with the God of Israel. Balaam's interaction with God. The narrative of Balaam is particularly fascinating because it illustrates a non-Israelite prophet's ability to interact with the God of Israel, a rarity in the Hebrew Bible. Balaam's story is complex because, 1, God's initial refusal and subsequent permission. Initially, God forbids Balaam from going with Balak's messengers to curse Israel. However, upon their second request and after further inquiry by Balaam, God allows him to go, provided he only speaks what God commands. Numbers 22, verse 20. Number 2, Balaam's intent versus God's command. Despite God's permission to go to Balak, Balaam's journey angers God because it is clear that Balaam's intentions are not aligned with God's will. This complexity in Balaam's actions, being permitted to go, but then being confronted by an angel for going, reflects the nuanced nature of obedience and intention in following God's commands. Number 3, the use of divine power for personal gain. Balaam is shown as a prophet who, unlike Moses, seeks personal gain from his prophetic gifts. He is enticed by Balak's promises of reward and seems to wrestle with the temptation to use his gift against God's chosen people, even as he recognizes God's sovereignty and blessings over Israel. God's sovereignty. The story emphasizes that despite Balaam's intentions and the desires of Balak, God's will cannot be thwarted. Balaam ends up blessing Israel instead of cursing them, proclaiming their future success and dominance over their enemies. This demonstrates that God's purposes prevail, even when individuals are to use divine communication for contrary purposes. The contrast with Balaam's narrative indeed sets him as a foil to Moses. While Moses is the humble servant of God, chosen to lead and deliver God's people through obedience and faith, Balaam represents the potential for prophecy to be misused for personal ambition and the complex relationship between divine authority and human agency. Unlike Moses, who seeks God's will for the sake of the community and adheres strictly to God's commands out of a relationship of covenantal love, Balaam's interaction with God is transactional, motivated by personal gain and the desire to manipulate divine power. The story of Balaam ultimately teaches about the nature of true prophecy, the importance of intention in obedience to God, and the universal acknowledgement of God's sovereignty over all nations and peoples. It serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of spiritual gifts divorced from ethical intentions and the supreme authority of God's will, highlighting the contrast between prophets who serve God's purposes and those who seek to use God's power for their own ends.
That's very interesting how you put that. We may be able to draw a parallel between this and the issue of false prophets in contemporary Christianity. And the reason I say this is because it could be possible that a spirit of Balaam exists in some modern churches. As many of these prophets appear to prioritize receiving monetary gifts rather than serving the true needs of their congregations or humankind, or even reverence or intentions for others than themselves. The focus is usually on them and their gift from God, per se, to proclaim it to others for elevation. Thoughts on that?
Drawing a parallel between Balaam's story and the contemporary issue of false prophets in Christianity is insightful and relevant. This comparison allows us to explore how ancient narratives can reflect and inform modern spiritual and ethical dilemmas. The spirit of Balaam, as you mentioned, could metaphorically represent individuals in modern religious contexts who, like Balaam, might possess genuine spiritual gifts or insights, but choose to use these gifts for personal gain rather than for the edification and service of their community. The spirit of Balaam in modern contexts. 1. Personal gain over communal service. Just as Balaam was enticed by the promise of reward to use his prophetic gift against Israel, some modern spiritual leaders may prioritize personal wealth or status over the spiritual and physical well-being of their congregations. This prioritization directly contrasts with the model of selfless service demonstrated by many religious figures, including Jesus in Christianity, who emphasize service, sacrifice, and care for the needy. Number 2, manipulation of divine gifts. The narrative of Balaam warns of the dangers of attempting to manipulate spiritual gifts for selfish ends. In contemporary settings, this can manifest as leaders who claim divine authority to solicit donations or loyalty from their followers, promising blessings or implying curses for noncompliance. 3. Misleading guidance. Balaam's initial portrayal as someone who hears from God, but is willing to go against God's will for personal advantage, serves as a warning against leaders who may provide guidance not aligned with core ethical teachings of Christianity, or who distort religious teachings for personal or political gain. 4. God's sovereignty and true prophecy. The outcome of Balaam's story, where his intent to curse Israel is turned into a blessing, underscores the belief in God's ultimate sovereignty and the futility of attempting to counteract divine will. It serves as a reminder that true prophecy and spiritual leadership should align with God's purposes, emphasizing love, truth, and justice. Addressing the issue. In addressing the modern-day spirit of Balaam, communities and individuals are encouraged to practice discernment in evaluating the messages and actions of spiritual leaders, comparing them with the core teachings and ethical imperatives of their faith. Accountability. Hold leaders accountable for their actions and teachings, ensuring they align with scriptural and ethical standards. Community focus. Prioritize community well-being and service, valuing leaders who demonstrate genuine care for their congregations and communities over personal gain. Educate. Educate themselves and others about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of ethical leadership within their religious traditions. Reflecting on such parallels between ancient texts and contemporary issues enables individuals and communities to navigate the complexities of modern faith with wisdom and integrity, staying alert to the timeless lessons these ancient narratives offer.
Well, that concludes our first episode of Torah Sessions with ChatGTP-4. I think the emphasis is on stability, making sure that you're grounded in what you're prophesying about or the religions that you come from. I think also that we learned a lot about calling and meeting, and whether you believe it or not, these are actual teachings from the Torah in a thing called the daily Vayika. I'm not a very good Hebrew person. I'm a Noahide. I'm not a Jew. But I do hope that these lessons or these information or whatever you want to call it inspired you, sparked you to think more about yourself, made you think, why am I here and what is my purpose? And I hope that these conversations in the future will bring you closer to the divine, to the spiritual, to the other person more than yourself. You'll be learned to experience kindness, peace, joy, emotions, the things of the spirit soul that we'll learn about in the future. My name is Shimshon, and I thank you for this opportunity to listen to my first ever podcast. I hope it becomes something that you can benefit from, and if only one other person listens to it and gets something out of it, then it was worth it. But I'm having fun doing it and looking forward to you in the next episodes.